I don't even know where to start with this. I'm usually not the type of guy who posts on Reddit, but this is different. I need to tell someone, anyone, before I lose my fucking mind. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. So, a few months ago, I was hanging out with some friends. We were having a few beers, talking about the usual shit. Work, life, the latest messed up things we'd seen online. My buddy Jake mentioned this new site on the dark web he'd heard about. He's into all that creepy off-the-grid stuff, and he likes to push the boundaries of what he can find. I've always been curious about the dark web, but I'm not exactly tech-savvy. Still, after enough drinks, I thought, why the hell not? And asked Jake to show me how to get on it. Big fucking mistake. Jake set me up with a Tor browser, showed me some basic safety stuff, and handed me a list of sites. Most of it was pretty tame compared to what I'd expected. Forums, weird conspiracy theories, drugs, and weapons for sale. Just the typical sketchy shit. But then, I found this one site, buried deep within a bunch of random links and dead ends. It didn't have a name, just a string of random numbers and letters. When I clicked on it, the first thing I noticed was how old it looked. The layout was basic, almost like something out of the early 2000s. The text was plain white on a black background, no images or anything. Just walls of text. It was all in English, but the sentences were disjointed, like it had been translated from another language and back again. The homepage was simple. Enter your name. I was already weirded out, but something about it intrigued me. I typed in a fake name, John Doe or something, and hit enter. It took me to another page with more text, just ramblings about nothing, random thoughts, phrases that didn't make any sense. I kept scrolling down, and that's when I saw it. My fucking name. My real name. It wasn't just that. Below my name was my birthday, my address, my fucking work history, even details about my family. Things no one should know, like the time I stole money from my mom's purse when I was 12, or that fight I had with my ex last year, where I punched a hole in the wall. At this point, I was freaked out but still not ready to believe this was real. I figured it was some kind of scam or data leak, so I kept scrolling. And that's when I saw something that made me nearly shit myself. There were detailed entries, diary-like, about things I'd done in the last few days. Stuff no one should know about. Like how I'd spent 2 hours jerking off to porn when I should have been working, or that I'd been sleeping on my couch because my bedroom was too depressing after the breakup. There was even a fucking entry about me finding this site. It read, Jake shows him the way. I remember my heart pounding in my chest as I slammed the laptop shut. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call Jake and scream at him, but what would I say? Hey man, did you put my life on some creepy-ass dark website? It sounded insane. For a few days I tried to forget about it. I didn't go back to the site, didn't even touch my laptop. But then the messages started. At first, it was just weird emails from unknown addresses. Stuff like, we're watching you, and how's the couch tonight? I figured it was just spam, but then they started getting personal. They knew things I'd never told anyone, like how I cried myself to sleep the night my ex moved out, how I'd been stealing from my company to make ends meet after the breakup, or how I'd fantasized about taking my old boss out into the parking lot and beating the shit out of him. Then the texts started coming in, always from different numbers. The messages would say things like, nice shirt today, or how's the hangover? Always after something specific I'd done that day. It felt like someone was right there with me, all the time. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed even. But every time I looked around, there was no one there. One night, I was sitting in my living room, trying to unwind after another shitty day at work. The texts had slowed down, and I was starting to think maybe it was just a prank, someone screwing with me. That's when my doorbell rang. I live in a quiet neighborhood, and it was almost midnight, so I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up, went to the door, and checked the peephole. No one was there. I stood there for a second, confused. Maybe it was a prank, some kids messing around. But when I opened the door, there was something on the ground, a package. No label, no address, just a plain brown box. Against my better judgment, I brought it inside and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a layer of old newspaper, was a book. It was thick, with a leather cover that looked ancient. There were no words on the cover, just a strange symbol, almost like an eye with jagged lines around it. I opened it up and immediately felt sick to my stomach. The book was filled with more details about my life. It was like someone had been following me for years, writing down everything. There were even pictures, blurry, grainy photos of me at work, at home, even in my fucking bedroom. There were also pages filled with strange symbols and drawings, stuff that looked like it belonged in some ancient cult or something. But the worst part was the final page. It wasn't a picture or a drawing. It was a fucking list. A list of names, all scratched out, except for mine. And next to my name, in blood red ink, was a date. Today's date. I threw the book across the room and backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the cops? What would I even tell them? That someone was stalking me? That they knew everything about me? I was losing it, man. I could feel my mind unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. That's when the lights went out. Not just in my apartment, but the whole building. I heard a loud bang from the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps. They were coming closer, getting louder with each step. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and stood there, shaking, waiting for whatever was coming. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could hear someone breathing on the other side, deep and ragged. Then, in a low guttural voice, they said my name. Not just my name, but the name I'd used on the dark web, the fake one. The voice was distorted, almost inhuman. It was like they knew everything about me, inside and out. I felt my skin crawl as the door handle started to turn. That's when I realized this wasn't just someone messing with me. This was real. This was something dark, something ancient, and it was coming for me. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I bolted out the back door, through the alley, and just kept running. I didn't stop until I was miles away, hiding in the shadows of some shitty motel on the outskirts of town. I locked the door, barricaded it with whatever I could find, and sat in the corner, knife in hand, waiting. The texts haven't stopped. They're getting worse, more detailed. They're telling me things that are going to happen, things that no one could possibly know. They keep mentioning the book, telling me to go back, to finish it. I haven't slept in days. I'm terrified to close my eyes. I keep seeing that last page, my name in blood red ink, the date scratched out, replaced with tomorrow's date. I don't know what they want, but I know they're not going to stop until they get it. If you're reading this, please, for the love of God, stay off the dark web. I don't know how much time I have left, but if you don't hear from me again, just know that I tried to warn you. This isn't a joke. This isn't a story. This is real, and it's coming for me. And if you're not careful, it might come for you too. After I ran from my apartment, I spent the night in that shitty motel. I barely slept, just sat there with that knife in my hand, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything to happen. The texts didn't stop. My phone kept buzzing every few minutes, each one more horrifying than the last. They were talking about things that hadn't even happened yet. They knew my thoughts, my fears, every fucking detail about my life. Things I hadn't even admitted to myself. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion because when I woke up, it was morning. My phone was dead, probably for the best, and I was drenched in sweat. For a split second, I thought maybe it was over, that I'd just had some fucked up nightmare, but reality hit me like a truck when I saw the motel room door. Someone had carved that symbol, the eye with the jagged lines, into the wood, deep and deliberate. There were also words scrawled in the same blood-red ink from the book, "You can't run forever." I panicked, grabbed my stuff, and got the hell out of there. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay there. Every place felt unsafe, like eyes were on me no matter where I went. I ended up wandering around the city, avoiding people, jumping at every shadow, until I found myself at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. It was one of those dingy old places with hardly any customers, the kind where no one asks questions. I ordered a coffee and sat in the back, trying to collect my thoughts. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the cup. I couldn't stop thinking about that book, about how it knew things that were supposed to be private. As I sat there trying to make sense of everything, I noticed something strange. The people in the cafe, the few that were there, kept glancing at me. Not in a normal way, but like they were expecting something, like they knew something I didn't. It was subtle at first, just quick glances over their shoulders, but then I caught the barista staring at me from behind the counter. He had this weird, almost satisfied look on his face, like he knew something horrible was about to happen. I couldn't take it. I got up and left, but as I did, I saw a man standing by the entrance. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. He didn't say anything, just watched me as I walked out. As soon as I was outside, I looked back, but he was gone. I walked for hours, aimlessly, until I found myself at a small park. I sat down on a bench, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. That's when my phone buzzed again. The battery had somehow charged, even though I hadn't plugged it in since I'd left the motel. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, but at this point, that was no surprise. It just said, "Check your pockets." My heart sank. With trembling hands, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I don't even know how it got there. I hadn't put anything in my pockets, hadn't even touched my jacket since leaving the cafe. The paper was old, yellowed around the edges, and it felt like it could crumble if I wasn't careful. I unfolded it and immediately felt sick to my stomach. It was a map, hand-drawn, of some kind of building. There were no labels, just a layout of rooms and hallways, but that wasn't what scared me. At the bottom of the map, in that same blood-red ink, were the words, "You need to see it for yourself." I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I decided to follow the map. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, but something inside me told me I had no choice. I had to know what this was, what was happening to me. It felt like the only way to get any answers. The map led me to an old abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It looked like it had been a factory or warehouse at some point, but it was long forgotten. The windows were boarded up, the walls covered in graffiti and grime. The place reeked of decay and abandonment. I hesitated at the entrance, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. The front door was unlocked, and I stepped inside. The air was stale, filled with dust and the smell of mold. The only light came from cracks in the walls and the occasional hole in the roof. As I walked through the building, following the map, I felt like I was descending into some kind of nightmare. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive with each step. Eventually, I reached a door at the end of a long hallway. It was different from the others, newer, sturdier. There was no handle, just a keyhole. I realized, with a sickening feeling, that I didn't have a key. But as I stood there, contemplating what to do next, I heard a click, and the door slowly creaked open on its own. I stepped inside, and my blood ran cold. The room was small, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb that flickered sporadically. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were dozens of books, all identical to the one I'd found in that package. But that wasn't the worst part. In the center of the room was a table, and on that table was a laptop. It was old, one of those clunky models from the early 2000s. The screen was black, but as I approached, it flickered to life, displaying that same fucking symbol, the eye with jagged lines. And then, the screen filled with text. It was a live feed, a fucking real-time transcript of everything I was doing, everything I was thinking. The words appeared on the screen before I even had a chance to act. It was like the laptop knew my thoughts before I did. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, like the whole room was alive and breathing. I could hear a low hum, almost like chanting, coming from somewhere deep within the building. It was growing louder, more intense, filling the room with a sense of dread that I can't even begin to describe. Then the screen changed. The text disappeared, replaced by a video feed. It was dark at first, just shadows and movement. But as it focused, I realized what I was looking at. It was my fucking apartment. The video showed my living room, my kitchen, my bedroom. It was a live feed, but not from security cameras. The angles were too strange, too personal. It was like someone was filming me from inside my own home, watching my every move. And then, the camera panned to the hallway, where I'd first found the book. The door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. And standing there, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape, tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to glow with a faint, unnatural light. The figure slowly turned towards the camera, and as it did, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It raised its hand, pointing directly at the screen, directly at me. Then the feed cut off, and the laptop screen went black. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out, or maybe I just ran until I couldn't run anymore. When I finally came to, I was outside the building, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and I knew deep down that I was being hunted. I don't know what this cult wants with me or why they're doing this, but I can't escape them. They know everything about me, things no one should know. They're inside my head, inside my life, and they're not going to stop until they get what they want. I've tried going to the police, but they think I'm crazy. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe a word I said. How could they? It sounds insane, even to me, and I'm living it. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. I can feel them closing in, tightening their grip around me. They're watching my every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Every day is a battle just to stay sane, just to stay alive. But I'm not giving up. Not yet. If you're reading this, please stay away from that site. Don't make the same mistake I did. If you see that symbol, if you get those texts, just run. Run and don't look back. Because once they have you in their sights, there's no escaping. I honestly don't know how I'm still here, writing this. Every day feels like I'm on borrowed time, like I'm just one step away from everything going to shit. Since my last post, things have gone from bad to fucking worse. Whatever this cult is, whoever they are, they're not just fucking with me anymore. They're playing some kind of sick game, and I'm the goddamn pawn. After I managed to get out of that building, I didn't go back to the motel. It didn't feel safe. Nowhere does. I've been moving around a lot, crashing at different places, sometimes friends' houses, sometimes just sleeping in my car. But it doesn't matter where I go. They always find me. The texts haven't stopped. They're getting more fucked up, more personal, like they're trying to push me to the brink. They talk about my deepest fears, my darkest secrets, things I've buried so deep even I forgot about them. They're not just watching me anymore, they're inside my head. A few nights ago, I was staying at a friend's place. He's an old buddy from college, one of the few people I still trust. I hadn't told him everything. I mean, how do you even begin to explain this shit? But he knew something was up. He let me crash on his couch, no questions asked. That night, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table. It was 3 a.m., and the whole house was dead silent. My buddy was passed out in his room, and I could hear his faint snoring through the wall. I didn't want to look at the phone, didn't want to see what fucked up message they'd sent this time, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. When I picked up the phone, there was no text, just a notification from an unknown app I'd never seen before. It was called Watcher. My first instinct was to delete it, but my thumb hovered over the icon. I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They'd just find another way to get to me. So, I opened it. The app was simple, just a black screen with a single word in the center, Live. Below it was a button that said, Watch. I hesitated for a moment, but then, against my better judgment, I tapped the button. The screen flickered, and then a video feed appeared. At first, it was just darkness, like the camera was pointed at the ground or something. But then, slowly the image adjusted, and I realized what I was looking at. It was my buddy's bedroom. The camera was positioned somewhere near the ceiling, giving me a clear view of the entire room. My friend was lying in bed, fast asleep, the covers pulled up to his chin. The room was dimly lit by the glow of his alarm clock, casting eerie shadows on the walls. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing by the bed, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall and thin, just like the one I'd seen in the video from my apartment. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was studying my friend, watching him as he slept. I wanted to scream, to do something, but I was frozen in place, my eyes glued to the screen. The figure slowly reached out, its hand hovering over my friend's face. It didn't touch him, just lingered there, as if it was savoring the moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the feed cut off and the screen went black. I bolted up from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. I rushed to my friend's room, flinging the door open, half expecting to see that thing standing over him. But there was nothing. Just my buddy, still snoring away, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I shook him awake, frantic, trying to explain what I'd seen. But he just looked at me like I was crazy, half asleep and confused. I couldn't blame him. I must have looked like a madman, standing there, breathless, eyes wide with terror. He told me to chill out, that it was probably just a nightmare. But I knew better. I knew that whatever this was, it was real. And it was getting closer. The next day, I decided I couldn't drag my friends into this anymore. It wasn't safe for them. I couldn't risk anyone else getting hurt because of me. So I left. I didn't tell him where I was going, just that I needed some time to clear my head. He looked worried, but he didn't push it. I think he could see that I was on the edge. Since then, I've been on my own, constantly on the move. I'm staying in cheap motels, always paying in cash, trying to stay off the grid. But it doesn't matter. They always know where I am. Every time I check my phone, there's a new message, a new warning. Last night was the worst yet. I was staying in this rundown motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I figured it was as good a place as any to lay low for the night. I was dead tired, running on nothing but fear and adrenaline, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. Around midnight, I heard something. At first, it was just a faint tapping, like someone was knocking on the door. I ignored it, thinking maybe it was just the wind or the old pipes rattling. But then the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the door, though. It was coming from the window. I froze. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a faint shadow moving behind them. My first thought was to run, but where the hell would I go? I was trapped. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. And then, the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I reached for my phone, fumbling in the dark, trying to turn on the flashlight. But as soon as I did, the phone buzzed in my hand. Another message. This one was different. It was a video file, sent from a blocked number. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. With shaking hands, I tapped on the file. The video started playing, the screen filling with grainy, low-quality footage. It was dark, almost too dark to see anything, but as the camera panned, I realized what I was looking at. It was me. The video was from the outside of my motel room, filmed through the window. I could see myself, sitting on the bed, staring at the phone, just as I was now. The camera zoomed in, slowly, until my face filled the screen. I could see the fear in my own eyes, the desperation. It was like watching a mirror, but from some twisted, fucked-up angle. And then, the camera started to move. It panned away from the window, showing the outside of the motel, the empty parking lot, the dark street beyond. And then, it started moving towards the door. My door. I could hear footsteps now, faint but growing louder, closer. The video continued, the camera moving steadily, relentlessly towards the door. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. The camera reached the door, paused for a moment, and then the video cut off. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my stuff and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I ran to my car, practically throwing myself into the driver's seat, and peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was away from there. I drove for hours, not even sure where I was headed. I ended up in some small town miles away, the kind of place that barely shows up on a map. I found another motel, even shittier than the last, and checked in under a fake name. I'm sitting here now, writing this, trying to make sense of everything. I don't know what they want, why they're doing this, but I'm starting to think it doesn't matter. They're not going to stop. They're not going to let me go. I'm scared, man. I'm fucking terrified. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure, standing over my friend's bed, its hand hovering just inches from his face. I see the camera moving towards my door, that slow, deliberate approach. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I'm running out of places to hide, running out of options. I'm exhausted, mentally and physically, but I can't stop. I can't let them catch me. If you're reading this, please stay the fuck away from that site. Don't go looking for answers. Don't go looking for me. Because if you do, they'll find you too. And once they do, there's no escaping. I don't even know why I'm still writing this. Maybe it's some desperate attempt to stay sane. Or maybe I just need to get it all out before whatever happens next. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running, but you need to hear the rest. You need to know what these people, these things, are capable of. I've been on the run for weeks now, and it feels like I'm just going in circles, always one step behind whatever fucked up plan they've got for me. After I bolted from that last motel, I drove through the night, barely able to see straight from exhaustion. Every shadow on the side of the road felt like it was reaching out for me, like it knew where I was going before I did. I didn't stop until I reached another town, some no-name place in the middle of nowhere. I figured it would be safe enough for a day or two, just enough time to catch my breath and figure out what the fuck I was going to do next. I checked into a rundown motel, the kind of place that probably hasn't seen a renovation since the 70s. The clerk didn't even look up from his magazine when I asked for a room, just slid the key across the counter without a word. I didn't care. The more anonymous, the better. The room was small, dirty, with peeling wallpaper and a stained carpet. The bed looked like it had seen more than its fair share of bodily fluids, but I was too tired to care. I threw my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the mattress, not even bothering to take off my shoes. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, it was dark outside. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the room in eerie flashes. I didn't want to look, didn't want to know what fresh hell was waiting for me this time, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The text was from another unknown number, but it was the same message as before. Open the door. My stomach twisted into knots. There was no way in hell I was opening that door. I sat up, grabbing the knife I'd been keeping under my pillow, and crept over to the window. The blinds were closed, but I could see a faint glow of light from the parking lot outside. I peeked through the blinds, expecting to see someone, something standing there, waiting for me. But there was nothing. Just the empty parking lot and the flickering neon sign of the motel. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, this was all in my head. But then the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap 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 on the door, like someone was barely touching it. But it was insistent, like whoever or whatever was out there knew I was inside, knew I was listening. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The knife felt like a useless piece of plastic in my hand, but it was all I had. The knocking grew louder, more urgent, until it was almost a pounding, the door rattling in its frame. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, frozen, my eyes locked on the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Minutes passed, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing. I was about to sit down to try and calm my racing heart when my phone buzzed again. Open the door. This time, the message was different. Below the text was an image, and as soon as I saw it, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a photo of me, taken from outside the window, just a few seconds ago. In the photo, I was standing exactly where I was now, knife in hand, staring at the door. They were watching me. They were right fucking outside. I didn't have time to think. I just reacted. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I didn't care where I was going, just that I had to get out of there, had to get away before they found me. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the pavement. I drove aimlessly for hours, not sure where I was headed, just knowing I needed to put as much distance between me and that motel as possible. Eventually, I found myself on a desolate stretch of highway, the kind that seems to go on forever, with no sign of civilization in sight. That's when the lights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car, someone else driving late at night. But as the lights got closer, I realized something was off. The headlights were too bright, too intense, like they were burning right through me. I tried to speed up, but the car stayed right on my tail, matching my every move. I swerved, trying to lose them, but it was no use. They were locked onto me, and there was no escape. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I slowed down, glancing in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind me, just the empty road stretching out into the darkness. But the relief was short-lived. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what fresh nightmare was waiting for me, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know. The message was simple, just 3 words. Check the trunk. I nearly lost control of the car, my heart slamming against my ribcage. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't want to get out, didn't want to see what was waiting for me, but I knew I had no choice. The trunk. I grabbed the knife from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. The highway was eerily quiet, not a single car in sight, just the endless stretch of road disappearing into the darkness. I walked around to the back of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the trunk, hesitating for just a moment before popping it open. The trunk lid lifted with a creak, and as it did, a wave of nausea washed over me. I had to fight the urge to vomit as I stared down at what was inside. There, lying in the trunk, was a body. It was a man, his face bruised and bloodied, his clothes torn and stained with dark patches. I didn't recognize him at first. How could I? But then, as I looked closer, I realized with horror who it was. It was Jake, my buddy, the one who'd shown me how to access the dark web in the first place, the one who'd set me on this fucked up path. His eyes were open, staring blankly up at the night sky, and his mouth was frozen in a twisted, silent scream. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. How the hell had he gotten in my trunk? When had this happened? I hadn't seen Jake in weeks, not since this whole nightmare started. And now, he was dead. I didn't have time to process it, didn't have time to think. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message, and this time, I knew I couldn't ignore it. You're next. I slammed the trunk shut, my hands slick with sweat and trembling with fear. I needed to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't just leave Jake's body behind. I couldn't. But I didn't know what else to do. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts and none of them making any sense. How had Jake ended up here? Who had done this? Why was this happening to me? But deep down, I knew the answer. I knew who was responsible. The cult. The one I'd stumbled across on the dark web. They weren't just messing with me anymore. They were making their move, and Jake was just the beginning. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't think straight. I had to keep moving, had to get as far away as possible. But I had no idea where to go. I got back in the car, the smell of death still clinging to the air around me. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and I took off down the highway, not caring where I was headed, just needing to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how far I went, I knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to stop. They weren't going to stop until they had me, just like they had Jake. And when they did, I don't even want to think about what'll happen next. If you're still reading this, if you're still following my story, just know that I'm running out of time. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're closing in, and I'm running out of places to hide. I don't know what they want from me, what their end game is, but I know it's not going to end well. I'm scared. I'm fucking terrified. And I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. If I disappear, if you don't hear from me again, just know that I tried. I tried to warn you. I tried to stay ahead of them. But this thing, this cult, it's bigger than me, bigger than anything I've ever dealt with. And if they get me, if they find me, just know that it wasn't for nothing. But please, whatever you do, stay away from the dark web. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't go looking for things that aren't meant to be found. Because once you find them, they won't let you go. I didn't think I'd make it this far. Honestly, I thought they'd have gotten me by now. But here I am, writing what might be my last message. I'm exhausted. Physically, mentally, in every way possible. I haven't slept in days, barely eaten, and my nerves are shot to hell. But I need to finish this. Need to get it all out before they come for me. After finding Jake in the trunk, I knew it was only a matter of time. They'd been tightening the noose around my neck, slowly, methodically, and now it was almost fully closed. I've been driving for what feels like forever, aimlessly, through towns that all look the same. I've lost count of the miles, the days, but the fear hasn't faded. If anything, it's only grown stronger, more suffocating. Everywhere I go, I see them. Not directly, but I feel their presence, watching, waiting. They're toying with me, like a cat with a mouse, drawing out the chase for their own sick pleasure. Every time I think I've shaken them, I get another text. Another fucking reminder that they're still there, still in control. Yesterday, I ended up in another small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, where strangers stick out like a sore thumb. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could find some place to hide, blend in for a while, but as soon as I walked into the local diner, I knew it was a mistake. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of old-timers nursing their coffee at the counter, and the waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a forced smile. But the second I stepped through the door, every single one of them turned to look at me. Their eyes were cold, unblinking, like they knew exactly who I was, like they were expecting me. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was seeing things that weren't there, but then the waitress approached my table, a pad in her hand, her smile frozen on her face. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat, almost mechanical. I hesitated, glancing around the diner. The old-timers were still staring, their eyes locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Just coffee," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, scribbling something on her pad before turning to walk away. But as she did, I caught a glimpse of what she'd written. It wasn't my order. It was my name. I bolted out of the diner, not caring about the curious looks I got as I stumbled out the door. My car was parked down the street, and I ran to it like my life depended on it. Because it did. I drove for hours, pushing the car to its limits, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every set of headlights in the rearview mirror made my heart jump. Every turn felt like it was leading me deeper into a trap. Eventually, I ended up at a rest stop on the side of the highway, the kind of place truckers use to catch a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a couple of big rigs and a few cars. I parked as far away from the others as I could, the isolation offering a small, fleeting sense of safety. I sat in the car for a while, trying to steady my breathing, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. My phone was buzzing again, but I didn't have the energy to check it. I knew what it would say. The same cryptic messages, the same taunts. They were wearing me down, breaking me piece by piece, until there'd be nothing left. After what felt like hours, I finally stepped out of the car, the cool night air washing over me. The rest stop was eerily quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the highway in the distance. I walked over to the restroom, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously as I approached. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, it was filthy. The kind of place you wouldn't step foot in unless you absolutely had to. The walls were covered in graffiti, the mirrors cracked and stained, but it wasn't the state of the place that bothered me. It was the message scrawled across the wall in that same blood-red ink. "Welcome home." I backed out of the restroom, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to get the hell out of there. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I spun around, the knife in my hand, ready to defend myself. But there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, the truck silent, the other cars dark. But I could still hear the footsteps, getting closer, the sound echoing in my ears, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then my phone buzzed again, and this time I forced myself to look. The message was short, just a single word that sent a jolt of terror through me. "Look." With trembling hands, I raised my head, scanning the area around me. For a moment, I saw nothing, just the empty rest stop, the dark highway stretching out into the distance. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows near the edge of the lot, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. But I knew it was watching me. I could feel its gaze burning into me, cold and unrelenting. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, like it was waiting for something, like it knew I had nowhere left to run. And then, one by one, the lights in the parking lot started to go out. I ran. I didn't care where, didn't care how far, just that I had to get away, had to escape before they closed in. But as I ran, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't getting anywhere. The highway stretched out endlessly in front of me. The rest stopped growing smaller in the distance. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape. The darkness was swallowing me, closing in from all sides, the figure still watching, always watching. And then, I heard it. The sound of chanting, low and rhythmic, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the same hum I'd heard in that room with the books. The same sound that had haunted me ever since this nightmare began. But now, it was louder, more insistent, like it was calling to me, pulling me towards something dark and terrible. I stopped running, my legs giving out beneath me, and fell to my knees on the side of the highway. The chanting grew louder, the darkness closing in, and I knew, deep down, I was out of time. My phone buzzed one last time, and I looked down, tears streaming down my face, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The message was simple, just 2 words, but they were enough to break me. It's time. The darkness swallowed me whole, the chanting reaching a deafening crescendo, and I knew this was the end. There was no escape, no way out. They had me, just like they'd always planned. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll wake up, if I'll even be me when I do. But if you're reading this, if somehow, some way, this message gets out, just know one thing. Stay away from the dark web. Don't go looking for things that aren't meant to be found. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Because once they have you in their sights, once they decide you're theirs, there's no escaping. And now, it's my time.